Logan writes in to say, do you think that if John Ternus succeeds Tim Cook as CEO, he will be more involved with the product development and design? Tim has reportedly stayed away from the product group, but John has been in charge of hardware engineering and knows these products on a different level than Cook ever could. With John's introduction of the Mac lineup this week, it had me thinking that he would be a better CEO when it comes to products.
What we learned when Tim Cook took over from Steve Jobs is Apple CEO needs to be themselves. Because nobody can be Steve Jobs and nobody can be Tim Cook. Tim Cook, Mr. Roommates, very efficient fellow.
Stephen
all about the
changed
supply chain.
Group chat that we have with us two, Federico and John, is changed to roommates.
To roommates makes sense. Makes
chat,
sense. Yeah, Tim Cook is he's got his skills, and his other thing that he's got as CEO is to lean on other people who are very talented. This is a good way to be an executive. Is you can't do it all. Mm-hmm. Even Steve Jobs couldn't do it all, right? Steve Jobs had a unique skills, but then there was also an organization supporting all the things that he was not good at. And there were a lot of them involving, different parts of management and people and the business and all of that, including the stuff Tim Cook did.
Yep.
And the stuff the CFO did.
Yep.
So, yes, I think if John Ternus became the CEO of Apple, he would absolutely be more involved and opinionated about aspects of product development and technology decisions, because that seems to be his thing that he's good at.
Yeah.
And that he will then rely on, if he becomes the CEO, he will rely on an operations person like Steve Jobs did to do, and Tim Cook does too, right? But Tim Cook has some unique viewpoints into operations.
I get the feeling that Jeff Williams, I'm convinced of this. Jeff Williams is not as involved in the operations as Tim Cook was for Jobs. Like, I would be convinced that Tim Cook still has quite a hand in that organization, because that's his
there's
thing.
An argument, right? Like, there's an argument that, Tim Cook as the CEO can't be the COO anymore, but he's more COO than Steve Jobs was. And that perhaps Jeff Williams is a little less COO than Tim Cook was, because Tim Cook has a little bit of focus on that. And which is not, and again, this is tough. This is management stuff, right? This is, I know all about this, but it's your job. On one level, yes, you need to let them do their job. On another level, though, you may have some unique insights into that job. So you need to get a good shorthand with the person who has your old job, where you can provide your insights while not becoming the COO, because it is their job and because you've got a different job now, right? So there's a dynamic there, but I do think that it's true that despite the fact that Tim Cook is the CEO and has been for a long time now, Apple's structure has taken on a little bit of the flavor of, we have a CEO who's really good at operations, right? And that's fine. And so if John Ternus is the CEO or anybody else, ideally they will have that kind of flavor. And yes, would that be a little more of a Steve Jobs vibe than Tim Cook? It would, because I think that John Ternus would be more connected to the products than Tim is. But in the end, to be a good CEO, you also have to build a team and rely on other people and identify the right people. And that's the part that anybody who succeeds Tim Cook is going to be tested on, but they will be able to lean on whatever their area of expertise is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, I think that I don't think it's fair to say better. I just think it's different, right? Like that John Ternus would
100%.
be a product-focused CEO, but realistically, are we not assuming that he would have the same input on the products as he currently does under Tim Cook as the CEO?
And don't forget the legacy of the people who've built the teams around them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know like Johnny Ives people have left now, right? Yeah. But let me give a better example. Like, Johnny Ives' philosophy is still there. Steve Jobs' philosophy is still there of product design. Even though Tim Cook's not a product design guy, his philosophy is still there. When Tim Cook retires, his philosophy that he built, that Steve Jobs brought him in to build when Apple was incredibly undisciplined at the operations side, and remember, the volume that Apple does now is nothing like even when Tim Cook took over. That operations machine will continue to run, and it's going to be the imprint of Tim Cook.
Yep.
These CEOs and their lieutenants, but especially the CEOs, leave their imprint on the company when they go. So does that mean that if you had somebody like John Ternus involved, that there might be a little more product-forward focus? Sure. I think that you're only human, and that you could maybe even argue that at different times in Apple's lifespan, it needs a CEO with a different focus.
A wartime.
They can't lose sight of the rest of it.
This is what they need.
Yeah.
I was thinking, it's very romanticized over time, and I think for a lot of good reason that Jobs' Ive was this design powerhouse, right? And built Apple into this company that's so focused around design. But the Cook-Williams era is this operations powerhouse that, as you said, has turned Apple from a medium company, a big company, into the biggest company, right? It doesn't matter how good the products are if you can't make them at the scale needed to sell them. And that's what Cook and Williams have done.
Yes,
but what
for
that
sure.
means is that if Ternus takes over, he has to inherit the operations powerhouse. Somebody needs to do that, because you can't just be like, I'm a product CEO, so we're not going to make as many products now. No, that doesn't work.
That's not how it works.
In the same way that no matter what you think about what Apple's products have been like in the last 20 years or whatever, or however long he's been CEO now, it's not 20 years, it's 15. I have 15, no idea. Yeah. They still had to inherit the design philosophy and push that forward. They couldn't just be like, we're going to make now the most operationally efficient product. No, they also had to look good, and sometimes I'm sure the disadvantage of trying to make these things as operationally efficient as they could be.
So here's a thing that has stuck with me, and forgive me because we're on the precipice of a presidential election in the U.S., but I'm going to quote a former president.
Why would you invoke that here? Why would you do this?
Well, because it's relevant to this. We're talking about CEOs.
We were going to get the whole way through.
No. But this is relevant. So, I'm going to quote Barack Obama here.
Please do.
And it's super relevant, which is somebody was asking him about the job of being president, and he said, every decision that comes to your desk as president, and this is true of Apple CEO too, is not, 70-30, 60-40. Everybody agrees we should do this, but what do you think? That's not what happens when you're president of the United States, and it's not what happens when you're CEO of Apple. Everything Obama said is 59-41. Again, boy, let's do that again. It's Monday morning, Myke. Sometimes it's hard. Math is hard. Everything he said is 51-49.
There you go.
Everything is 50.5, 49.5.
Yeah.
You come to the boss when there's a decision to be made and there's no clear decision. You've got to make the decision. That's where the buck stops. In the Oval Office and at whatever they call Tim Cook's airy, well-lit Apple Park desk is I don't know what that's called, Tim's office. This is Tim. And that is the thing, right? So part of being CEO is to make the trains run on time, get the products going, rely on your people who are incredibly talented, make sure they're being paid well, making sure they're being treated well. A lot of that is that. What it comes down to, and I think we ascribe maybe too much in some cases, but where it comes down to in the end is that person at that desk when it comes time to, are we going to do this or not? And everybody's split. It's this is going to be a big investment. We think it's risky, but we think we should do it. But these people think we shouldn't do it. What should we do? If everybody agrees, it's great, let's do it, then, the CEO doesn't have to do anything. It's the hard decisions that matter.
Yeah.
And that does affect the future of the company. It really does. And you can't always tell what it's going to be. And it's not, and so the difference from going to Tim Cook versus John Ternus or Steve Jobs or whoever else is going to be in those moments. And I do think that those decisions are informed by their particular knowledge you should be knowledgeable about the entire business, but I do think that there is sometimes a sense that some of the hard decisions Apple has made during the Tim Cook era were being made by a guy who was aware of Steve Jobs' product legacy and also aware of all the necessities of running a business at the scale that Apple has become. And then Tim Cook has to sit there and think, do I want to do this product? Do I want to make this decision? Because I know a lot about the operations, and I'm also putting on faith, and my trust in my people about the product side of it. And he has to synthesize that.
Yeah.
And a John Turnus would be the other way. He would know more probably about the product side of it and the engineering side of it, and would need to rely on the trust or faith in the people on the operations side or wherever to make that decision. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about is to be a CEO is to make those difficult decisions, and they do reflect you. But also, hopefully, they reflect the team you've built and the trust that you've engendered across them. So I this is a long non-answer in some ways, because it's like no CEO is going to come in and say, all the Pro products are going to have colors now, right? They're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. But it does matter who the CEO is.
Yeah. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a video that I actually quite enjoyed from the Wall Street Journal. They have like a series called The Job Interview, and Tim Cook was on that, and it's like an 8-minute video, and he's talking about a few questions. He talks about Steve a little bit. He talks about like kind of his philosophy and like how he feels about operations. It's a nice video. I like when people can kind of break him out of the PR answers, right? Because he's not really talking about products. One of the main reasons I bring this up here is I'm manifesting a new life goal that I have. All right, I'm just going to put this out there, and this came up a little bit unconnected, and I'm putting it out there again now. I want to interview Tim Cook and talk to him purely about how he works. That's what I want to speak to him about. I want to ask him about how he deals with email. How much email does he see? I want to know, how does he like to meet with people? Does he like to meet in person? How does that work? I had thought of a question this morning, because now this is in my brain now is the thing that I want. A question I had this morning, which popped into my mind, is how often do you work on your own? Do you ever work on your own? Or are there always people working with you, right? Does Tim Cook ever sit in an office in front of a computer and work on his own? And if he does, what work is that? These are the questions I want to ask him, because I think it would be fascinating. So I'm just putting this out there, right? I just want to talk to him. So we'll see what happens, Yeah,
I have those moments where I think, wouldn't it be interesting to talk to somebody about? Yeah. And there's usually somebody who's a better fit, because it's about a subject where there's specialized media for that. This is an example where we are the specialized media for that.
Yeah.
So that's I keep dare to dream. I would love that. Maybe we could get it, if not from Tim Cook. Let's get it from John Turnus or from Jaws.
I would love to speak to. I would like to speak to anybody at Apple about these specific
about
things.
how they actually use their.
Because I also genuinely
devices.
think it would be more interesting than the other types of interviews that these people have to do. Because I would just like to understand, if you are the CEO of the world's most powerful company, potentially, whatever. I think Apple's the most powerful company in the world. But if you're the CEO of that company, what is your actual work like? I'd be intrigued.
Yeah.